From Francis Ngannou making a bombshell career move to the PFL, to Jake Paul pushing PFL to challenge UFC's dominance, let's find out if the PFL is gonna take over the UFC. Honestly, when Ngannou went on to be the biggest free agent in combat sports, no one thought he was gonna sign a deal with the PFL. And there's more than just a load of cash here. Clearly, after the former heavyweight champion turned down one of the biggest contracts in UFC history, and I'm talking about an $8 million fight, everyone knew he wanted a lot more than money. For one, he wanted to set a new standard for fighters, with healthcare insurance and lawyers to scan deals and boost negotiations. But the UFC wasn't ready to sign on to any of those demands, so he gave up one of the biggest paying deals in the UFC and his heavyweight title to become a free agent. And in that time, fighters and fans questioned his UFC exit. Was it the right thing to do or just an impulsive decision that's gonna make him regret it? Well, after the PFL deal, I don't think anyone's gonna ask that question anymore, especially after all the perks he's got now. For starters, he's gonna sit on the PFL's Global Advisory Board. Remember when he turned down a $25 million offer from One Championship just because they wouldn't give him a seat on the board of directors? Yep, he wasn't fooling around. Ever since he left the UFC, he knew exactly what he wanted, and now he's gonna be fighting exclusively in MMA for the PFL's PPV Super Fight Division, with his debut set to happen in 2024. To top it off, he's also an equity owner and chairman of PFL Africa. Now let me tell you, this is a 2 to 3 fight deal max, but with every fight, there's a high 7-figure purse guaranteed, plus a split of the event's net profits. And no, he's not missing out on the signing bonus either. But other than the money and respect, PFL also agreed to his reasonable demands, the same ones he set on the table for UFC, which means he's got the right to have his own sponsors in the cage. Kudos to the fighter for sticking to his guns and getting exactly what he believed he was worth, even if it meant rejecting offers worth millions of dollars. Because in the end, he believes in the PFL's fighter-first culture and the whole idea of developing the sport in Africa. Plus, PFL isn't gonna stand in his way if he wants to go ahead with a few boxing fights, especially since fans are super excited to see him in the ring with one of the top heavyweights like Tyson Fury. Meanwhile, despite winning 6 fights back-to-back, his relationship with UFC is broken to the point Dana White vowed he'd never let Ngannou come back to the UFC again. Although, I'm not sure if that even matters anymore, especially considering the former heavyweight champion joined hands with the PFL, and while his UFC exit brought up mixed reactions, his PFL deal had a lot of positive responses, like Daniel Cormier, who believes the Cameroonian fighter set a new standard. Even though Daniel retired from the mixed martial arts, his passion still runs strong with him. And this time, he's pretty impressed that the Predator managed to crack a deal with the PFL, especially with his demands that had some fighters calling him arrogant. But let's face it, Cormier isn't wrong, because Ngannou didn't go down the traditional path of every free agent. Instead, his success is a huge win for every fighter out there who might be thinking twice before challenging his contract, just to avoid the burden of free agency. Ngannou looked at it as an opportunity to get what he wants and set the stage for other fighters to come up and join him on it. Now he's got the freedom he needed all along to set up fights with whichever opponent he deems fit, while making a real change as the brand ambassador for the PFL. Sure, the UFC had all the money in the world to throw back at him, but it was never gonna bow to his demands. That said, with PFL swooping in with a dream deal for Ngannou, I can't help but think maybe that's the competitive edge for the PFL. Right from the start, PFL founder Don Davis knew the Mixed Martial Arts League could compete with the UFC, even though they're already behind in the game, and the UFC has pushed its way through MMA deep enough that you'll probably see fans mistake any MMA entity for the UFC. But Davis stepped into the industry with a long-term plan to shape the promotion into an actual competitor that could break the dominance. Sure, it's not perfect, but considering the competition, I gotta say it's moving in the right direction faster than you'd think. By 2021, the PFL signed a broadcast deal with ESPN and took on a bunch of older stars who already made their names in the UFC, like the former champion Anthony Pettis, along with Olympic gold medalist Clarissa Shields. By 2022, it renewed its ESPN deal, and the total viewership for every single event jumped to over 340,000. And now the PFL is ready to expand into Europe while dipping its toes in India and Latin America. So if you think about it, with all the top fighters and broadcast deals, the PFL has come to the point where Davis strongly believes it can coexist alongside the UFC as an industry leader within the next couple of years. And while it's signed a bunch of fighters, and I'm talking about former UFC title challenger Thiago Santos, its most impressive addition has gotta be Shane Burgess, mostly because he was the only one to quit the UFC on a winning streak back then. Think about it, the fighter literally fought his way through smaller promotions just to get a shot at the UFC, where he went on to become one of the most exciting featherweight fighters, even if it was without a title. Sure, the UFC gave him the sport's biggest platform, where his aggressive style kicked in a few wins, but he never made enough money to live the life of luxury he deserved. When he first started out, he was living in a one-bedroom apartment, but now he's got kids and a wife to take care of. So he's putting his life on the line in every single fight. It's gotta be worth it, which is why he signed with the PFL. In fact, he said the money he makes from one PFL fight is still more than his last few fights at the UFC combined, along with win bonuses. Okay, that's a huge difference right there, but it's not surprising either, because concerns over UFC fighter pay aren't new, especially since they've become a trigger for the UFC president, and with some of the top fighters leaving the promotion to find better fighting opportunities elsewhere, only to wind up at the PFL, has opened the door for renewed criticism. I gotta admit, if the PFL keeps training its young talent and find a way to grab the attention of UFC fighters in their primes, I could easily see it challenging the UFC for the top spot sooner than you think. To top it off, with the PFL launching its 2023 season, it signed another face of the organization, the YouTuber turned boxer, Jake Paul, who's ready to add MMA to his questionable resume, with his debut set to happen this year. And there's just one question. Will he finally lead PFL to challenge UFC's dominance in the next few years? Maybe. You gotta admit, many promotions went down that road, only to finally give up in the end because it seems like no one can overpower the UFC. But now, things are a lot more interesting in the MMA landscape with Jake's entry, especially considering his public rivalry with White. I mean, the two leave absolutely no opportunity to defame the other, and one thing that Jake can't stop talking about, White's resistance towards fair fight pay and healthcare insurance. Yep, the same demands that Ngannou asked for. And now, with the two dedicated fighters signing a deal with the PFL, it's gonna bring a whole lot of attention to the promotion. And if that wasn't enough, Jake's ready to set up a fighters union to demand the pay and benefits they deserve. That said, I'm pretty sure you're gonna agree with me when I say that Paul's got a great track record of drawing interest and selling pay-per-views with his matches, even if that's mostly because of the stars he's up against in the ring, who've already built their loyal fan base. And that's good enough for PFL. If you ask me, a Paul MMA is intriguing enough, even without the list of potential opportunities that'll get PFL the brand new eyes it wants. But does that translate into the PFL challenging the UFC soon enough? Well, you gotta wait to find out, at least until there's big news on his fighters union at least. All I can say is the PFL is definitely on the right track. So from Jake Paul pushing PFL to challenge UFC's dominance, to Francis Ngannou making a bombshell career move to the PFL, that was all on how the PFL is gonna take over the UFC.